Switching to nano communication. Kaysen, do you read me?
Loud and clear.
Good. Let's proceed with the briefing. It's important that everyone is on the same page in terms of the purpose of this podcast and what to expect from it. First and foremost, this is not a lore podcast.
Lore podcast?
That's right. In this podcast, we focus on the literary elements of game narrative, the core themes, philosophy, and symbolism woven into the story. We will not be detailing every element of Metal Gear's world, nor will we be exhaustively summarizing every moment of the plot or reviewing every line of dialogue.
That's good news. That would definitely get tedious.
What we focus on is how, through the use of art design, cinematography, music, sound, performance, and storytelling techniques, the creators achieved their thematic goals. We'll then analyze what they were trying to tell us and how it's relevant to our own lives.
So, that must mean that we're interested in what makes Metal Gear Solid valuable as art.
That's right. But it's important to remember that if there's anything that the audience feels like we're missing in the conversation, they can always leave a note in the comments section, which we do read, and we'll then consider those thoughts and possibly bring them up in the next episode.
Man, how many episodes are there gonna be?
At least 4, though there's always a possibility that additional episodes will be required. Also, since this is a gaming podcast, we'll discuss how gameplay is used to tell the story.
How gameplay tells the story?
Yes, that's what makes this medium unique, after all.
All right. I think I understand the purpose of this show now.
Good. Remember, if you have any questions, you can always contact me at this frequency.
Roger that.
All right. If you're ready, let's get to work. Metal Gear, doesn't matter which one. It's like always the hardest game for me to like gather my thoughts and like know what to talk about. I made that video last week sort of, in preparation for this and kind of talking about it. I really am just like basically confused as to how any of this works as like a story that like resonates with people and that, is popular. It's
possibly you should be.
It's so freaking crazy.
It is.
It's just such a crazy, in a good way, crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And just unique and creative property. And I'm very, very excited to talk about it, but it's hard to know like where to begin a lot of times or like how to make sense of it.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit intimidating on that side of things, but hopefully, we've done a lot of prep for this at this point. So,
yes, we have. And not to mention, we've, after having played the first one, we have a pretty good history, a lot of the history for like Kojima and his specific story and how the loss of his father at a young age and these kind of things. We detailed in the history, the dev history episode for Metal Gear Solid 1. Right. And so this one's going to kind of just build on the back of that.
Yeah, exactly. I guess we could probably start with him. Kojima as a creator, as a game developer, as a writer and storyteller. He's a confounding person. He's in many ways like the games themselves. He's kind of full of contradictions. He says one thing in an interview 20 years ago and a very different thing later, and it's kind of like hard to he says. And especially when it comes to this game and like the theme of this game and how it's about like passing on not through your genes, but through the other things, the culture, through the stories you tell, through, your traditions, what you pass on to the following generation. He talks
and how
about,
that's even more important than the DNA,
the genes,
right?
Than
the genes.
But he talks about how he wanted this to be where he passed on Metal Gear as a series to his junior developers and he would move on to something else. And
there
then
was a specific,
he went on to do number 3, number 4, number 5.
He did eventually stop. He did eventually leave the company and stop.
So like, I get like the idea of what he's going for, but like he's an interesting guy and he seems to be kind of torn about like what he wants.
Definitely.
What he wants for this series and whether he wants someone else to have a real like chance to do it or whether he has to get back involved again. And
sometimes that's the artist's dilemma, right? Yeah. If you remember when Gandalf, when Ian McKellen was asked to be Gandalf in The Hobbit, right? After having played Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. And initially he said, "Oh, another chance to work with Peter Jackson. Oh, but I couldn't let anyone else be Gandalf." You know? It was like, okay, right. He didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But he didn't want to let someone else do it.
Right.
And so he was just like, you know, I have to do it. I have to keep doing the thing, even though I thought I was done. I thought it was over. I'm going to go back and do it again. And it's just it's like an artistic dilemma to leave a project and be done with it. I think maybe you can understand that a little bit with your book.
Sure.
It's difficult to just like be done and to be like, I'm done with it. I've done everything I want to do and it's over. It's right. Over. And that's a very difficult thing for creative people.
Yeah, it is for sure. Well,
I think I can't wear that thing all day.
Because we are a podcast that is first and foremost interested in breaking down the core themes and philosophy and like the real message behind what the creator is trying to say with the story, that maybe we can start with that. Good. And I think that will help us to kind of understand and paint the analysis or color our perspective on the analysis that we're going to do. So as a first episode on each of our series, we always begin with a development history. And I want to read a quote here from Hideo Kojima about what it was he was trying to do with this game. So he says, in Metal Gear Solid 1, the central theme is about the transmission of what we have in our genes, such as hair and skin color. In Metal Gear Solid 2, the central theme is about what we pass on to our future generations that are not transmitted in our genes, the way we think, our culture, music, songs, and stories. In the beginning, this sort of information was inscribed on stone tablets, and later it was written down on paper. Now everything is digitized. So that's a real big part of it, is the digital information and what we're passing on through digital information. That's another real key part to this. Yeah. Elsewhere, I believe on Twitter, he also had a couple of tweets. I think we brought these up in the first Metal Gear.
Oh, we did, yeah.
He has sort of like a lineage of like where each game goes in terms of its theme. One word and then an arrow pointing to the next one. One word pointing to the next one. Yeah. We'll put this on screen so you guys can see it. So Metal Gear Solid 1 was Gene. Metal Gear Solid 2 was Meme. Metal Gear Solid 3, Scene. Metal Gear Solid 4, Sense. And then we have Peace, which is for Peace Walker. And then he has an arrow. This was before Metal Gear Solid 5 came out. There was a question mark for what the next game was going to be, which he then answered in a tweet later. So it says, answer to that question. It is race and revenge, or just race. The word race is for Metal Gear Solid 5. So we're going to be focusing on the second one, obviously, today, which is meme. So we all think of the word meme when it comes to internet memes, which is, essentially that's the idea behind it
a meme,
is something that continues to be passed and shared and sort of like retold or becoming sort of saturated in the culture.
Yes.
But it's an idea that is taken and iterated on or passed between people. That's what meme really means.
And the reason why we call a picture with text under it a meme nowadays, it depends on the picture. Usually something from The Office, like, let's be real. That's like where most memes come from. But the idea is that only people from this culture will get it. That's the whole point of putting a picture and then typing some text. And it's never universal. It's always like, oh, maybe not every person in the world is going to get this, but certain people will. And that's the propagation of the culture, right? The people who get it then share in the thing that they get exclusively, and then they share it with all their friends, and it continues the that element of the culture propagating itself, into the future.
Right. So we're not talking about jokes on the internet necessarily.
Jokes are cultural, but
it's the same idea of passing an idea that then saturates the culture, is passed around. and the way in which we do that, not just for our own generation, but for the generations that come after us.
Yes, yes.
That is how the word meme is being used in this sense.
Right.
I guess the correct form, what it actually means.
Well, so the lineage towards meme that Dawkins kind of outlines in The Selfish Gene is something like you've got your genes, and then he talks about extended phenotypes, right? And this is the one where scientists, at least at the time, biologists didn't know exactly where to categorize these things. Something like a beaver's dam, right? Is the dam part of the beaver, right? And then you would say, well, without the beaver, there is no dam, and it's a very purposeful thing. And even beavers that are raised without having seen a dam know how to build one, right? That's programmed, right? But it's not part of their body; it's something outside of them, right? And then, by extension of the external phenotype, then you have the next level, even stepping beyond that. Well, what about the unseen cultural influences of social animals, right? Is that an extended phenotype? And it's like, well, no. And then Dawkins kind of comes up with the idea of a meme, right? It's sort of an extended phenotype is like in between a meme and a gene. But the meme is like pure memory stuff. And it's not technical, structural. It's not like physically structured, if that makes sense. Whereas the extended phenotype is, and then you go back to the genes. It all leads back to the genes, but they're technically different. And Dawkins was pretty brilliant in kind of realizing that.
Yeah.
It was what, 45, 50 years ago?
Putting terms to it that,
you
know, you listen to that or look at that and go like, oh yeah, that like makes perfect sense. Right. Yeah.
And I think that book, The Selfish Gene, is probably the core book for, I would say, all of Metal Gear, but at the very least, the first and second games that we've played up to this point.
Definitely. So in preparing for this, I read a lot of interviews and I watched the making of Metal Gear Solid 2 documentary.
Too, and it's really good, but don't watch it until you've played the game, first of all. And it contained a lot of, just a lot of late game stuff. Yeah.
I mean,
it's very cool.
They actually do warn you at the beginning of the documentary. It's like a message that comes on screen like, you should probably play the game before you
I skipped
watch
that.
This.
I skipped that. I was like, I'm not reading that.
So I watched that, and there's a lot of really good tidbits that give some background on like the creative process for the game. Took a lot of quotes down, so just want to go through some of those.
Good.
As we again prepare to understand where the creators of the game were coming from in making this.
There's a huge, I don't know, we probably should save this, but we'll have to put a bookmark here with that theme that we just now discussed. And a huge gameplay element that came as a very big surprise for me. So we're going to talk about that in future episodes. But this whole game really does revolve around the concept of a meme and passing knowledge on in a really deep way that I think they had guts to do it the way that they did it. It's wonderful, and it took me absolutely by surprise. So just to get everyone listening who hasn't played it yet excited to play it, this game just... it's a twist machine, a satisfying twist machine, right?
Yeah. I liked it a lot. Maybe we should start there, actually. I mean, even
great.
Before we get into it, just like your overall feelings on the game without getting into details. It's
so much fun, dude.
Freaking loved it.
Me too, man. It took me back.
It's really weird. I was sitting down and playing it. This was my first time playing Metal Gear Solid 2.
Oh, really?
And like
Me too.
I like realized that, and I had no idea how that was possible because I played Metal Gear Solid 3 first, like a really long time ago, probably like 2005-ish.
Okay.
And then I went immediately back and played Metal Gear Solid 1.
Okay.
Actually, no, that's not true. It wasn't 2005. I think it was 2007 because Metal Gear Solid 4 was out. So I didn't play it until like Metal Gear Solid 4 was out.
Okay, yeah.
But I played 3 first because I heard that's the beginning of the story chronologically. So I was like, I'll start there.
I see.
And then I went back to 1.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason that I cannot explain to you, I don't remember what was going through my head. I did not play 2 and went to 4. It was probably to do with the fact that I had a buddy who really wanted to play it and he was over. And so I was like, oh, let's just play that instead. But don't do that. You really need to play Metal Gear Solid 2 before you play Metal Gear Solid 4. The game makes no sense if you haven't. So anyways, and then I even played like Peace Walker and some of like the side games after that and never went back to 2. And I don't know why. So this was my first time playing it. And there's a lot of pieces that fell into place in terms of understanding sort of like the chronological story between games. And I was like, I can't believe it. But I really, really liked it a lot. It's definitely up there. I think 3 is my favorite for sure, but this would be like right up there alongside it. I really liked Metal Gear Solid 2 a lot.
Yeah, me too. It was a blast. My first experience with Metal Gear Solid, I believe, Metal Gear Solid Snake. It was a Game Boy Color.
The Game Boy Color version of Game 1.
Yes. Oh, but I didn't.
Metal Gear Solid 1, I should say. There's of course Metal Gear and
from like 91 or something like that.
The old originals.
Ones. Yeah, this was Metal Gear Solid for sure. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever, but I didn't understand the story at all. I didn't get any of that stuff until we basically reviewed the game. So this is my first time playing Metal Gear Solid 2 as well.
Yeah.
What a fun game.
It's so good.
What a blast to play. Man, it took me back to the old days of Splinter Cell and of just those fun, like sneaky games that you could do back in the early 2000s that were kind of optional, whether or not you're totally massacring everyone or maybe you're going to be more sneaky and just like put people to sleep and the creative ways, creative ways you can do that. Deus Ex kind of feels similar, although that came a little bit later. But I don't know why. Okay, I do know why I didn't play this game. GameCube. Now it did come out on GameCube later.
Well,
right?
that's a remake of the first game.
So
okay. Twin Snakes is a remake of Metal Gear Solid 1.
Perfect. So I didn't play that. But I had a GameCube, didn't play that game. Didn't play Metal Gear Solid 2 at all until now. And Metal Gear Solid 1 was super fun, and everyone keeps saying you got to play 2. And in games where they have like tons of entries, like 6 or 7 or 8, I usually kind of ignore people who say you've got to play such and such a number in order to get it, or, this is the best one, right? For whatever reason, Final Fantasy is always excluded from that in my mind because they're different games, right? They're different characters.
It's not one storyline.
Yeah, but as you know, I'm not the biggest fan of sequels. And so it's like, okay, look, dude, I don't know, man. But it's 100% true here. Metal Gear Solid 2 was so good, and it kind of helped me to understand a little bit more about like the first game as well. Mm-hmm. I kind of caught Kojima's vision a little bit better in this one than the first one, which is so dumb. Okay, I love the PS1 graphics. Yeah. I love them so much. It pains me to admit that there is any fault with game design in the 90s on the PS1. Mm-hmm. The PS1 is OP, the graphics are the best, and all games should look like that. However, there is a downside when your game looks like that, which is there's some awkwardness. There's limitations.
To be cinematic.
Exactly.
I think that's the issue you're referring to. Is Metal Gear Solid was one of the first games that was like a truly cinematic video game where you're getting close up on characters' faces. And,
PS1 Hagrid.
Yeah, and it's like, you're not getting a good read on their emotions necessarily that way.
Not necessarily.
I mean, we've talked about a ton
and the audio limitations too, of characters can't talk over each other and all of the issues with that as well. It was a little bit harder for me to get into. But with Metal Gear Solid 2, kind of filling in some of the gaps in not necessarily, well, maybe a little bit of the story, but it didn't really go back and rewrite anything. I just understand Kojima better now. Mm. And now going back and just even thinking about Metal Gear Solid 1, I have a much better view of it now than I did when I first played it, which was for our podcast.
Yeah.
And I want to play it again and offer some more insight as well from that first game at some point.
I tell you what, I mean, we're doing a season 2 of Xenogears at some point, so I guess
yes,
we'll
we
have
are,
to do
people.
a season 2 of Metal Gear Solid 1 as well.
So anyways, I freaking loved the game. It was an absolute blast to play.
It was great. I took this note from, it's a quote from Kojima talking about like what inspired the concept for Metal Gear. And I think this is really not only just true, of course, but something that's important to keep in mind when it comes to this flavor of stealth action gameplay.
Yeah.
He says, when I was little, I used to play hide and seek and kick the can. Maybe kids today don't play games like that as much as we did. At any rate, when you play games like that, you're assigned roles that can change from 1 minute to the next. Right. First, you're on the team that's hunting, and the next, you're being hunted. 180-degree reversals like that introduce the elements of fear that make these games so much fun. Actually, I still play hide and seek with my son. That's where I got the idea for Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah. That's my first note here as well.
Yeah.
It's super cool. And it also harkens to the concept of memes, of passing on culture. Games that children play are learned from the older kids above them who learned it from the older kids above them. There's a long lineage of tag that goes back probably 100,000 years,
far.
maybe probably 1 million years, probably 5 million years. Okay, I don't know exactly how long, but it likely goes back way so far back it's impossible to even grasp it in any tangible way. It's just the immeasurable past that is fades into the ghosts of human ancestry. And that's where tags started. And kids are still playing it today. That's really strong on the mimetic side, right? Even though, obviously influenced by genes, but it's the memes that kept that game alive. There are certain things that will never die as long as humans exist. And tag is one of them. And I love even the concepts he's talking about too. As he plays tag with his children, once again, his father died when he was young. So this is important for him. His interactions with his children are very important. There's a heightened importance to them for him specifically relative to other people. He's trying to help his kids out, teach them, pass down those memes, because you never know when you're going to go. And he has firsthand knowledge of that from a young age. And so the way that tag, as soon as I heard that line from the documentary, I was like, I see exactly how that fills out so much of this game, so much of the game.
Yeah,
it's really cool, and I love it too because I play tag with my kids all the time, and it's a joy to play hide and seek or something like that with really young children who really don't. They'll hide in the same place every time, and it's just really fun. You kind of have to teach them a little bit by example of hey man, there's more creative ways to do this,
Yeah, that's really funny. We've talked a lot. This is going to be kind of a recurring thing. I think I'm going to focus on it really heavily in our next episode as a setup.
Yeah.
And then we'll pay it off at the end. But we've talked a lot about sequels in the past on our podcast.
Yeah.
And how we don't like them for various reasons a lot of times. One of the reasons is because a lot of times stories are written without sort of a plan or even an intention to do a sequel.
Yes.
But
that is the case.
There's this sort of unanticipated giant success that may happen. And then it's then we gotta make another one now.
Yeah.
Now, there's a little bit of nuance to this. This isn't quite the Back to the Future type of example where it's okay, what do we do now in a sequel? Metal Gear Solid was not the first. They had Metal Gear before that and Metal Gear 2.
Yeah.
So it was already a series. But Metal Gear Solid was not necessarily written with the intention, we're going to set up this and this and this story, plot beat or whatever, so that we can continue this. And
then we'll pay it off in Metal Gear 5.
Yeah.
The fact that Kojima didn't think he would do another one after 2 should tell you a lot, right?
Yes.
He put it all on the table, and he wasn't planning on anything in the future.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the point here is I'm okay with sequels if it's Lord of the Rings. It's written with a plan beforehand. It's meant to be 3 parts.
We've brought up Avatar, The Last Airbender as well. Clearly planned from the beginning,
That's fine. We're talking mostly about sequels where there wasn't necessarily a plan, or the plan was if it succeeds, then we'll consider a sequel, which is a lot of times what a new IP for a game company is.
Every new Netflix show or movie or a lot of new...
It's contingent on
there
the
is,
success.
At the very end of the last episode, there's always some extra thing that's oh, you better hope that we get funding to do a sequel because otherwise you'll never know where this was going. Yeah,
right.
They leave things open-ended now. I've noticed that a lot lately, and I don't love it. Stories, a good story should have a good beginning, and it should have a good ending. And we're missing the good ending part lately, I think, because of this.
This could have, and in many ways does, fall into the trappings of what you tend to see when a game or a movie or something with no intention of a sequel gets popular and then they end up doing a sequel is, let's repeat basically that thing again in some different contexts, but more or less just not break what isn't, or not fix what isn't broken, and just do it again.
Yes. But why is this game so good?
This game does, in a lot of ways, do that.
In many ways.
But I want to prep you by saying it was done with a very specific thematic purpose.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I love it.
once again, it's less so if we try to be like, oh, I don't like sequels for this reason, and if you try to outline some objective reasoning for why you do or don't prefer things, post facto for the original work of art, you always run into but it depends on how it's done. Yeah, like you can outline all the facts and say, oh, I don't like it for this and this and this. But sometimes if it's done well, if there's a way to do it creatively, then all of a sudden I don't care about sequels.
Exactly.
Sequels are dope all of a sudden, and I think it's fine, and I'm all for them, right? You've got to allow yourself the leeway. Don't pigeonhole yourself so much to where you have this idea in your mind that keeps you from enjoying good art, right? This is a sequel. It does fall into many of those trappings. It is a dope, really good game, and everyone should play this game. Maybe not every single person, but most people should play this game because of the way that it does it. Absolutely brilliantly. Like you play the first game, whatever. You do not see what's coming in throughout the course of this game.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless it's all been spoiled for you. Which, by the way, it probably had been spoiled for me. But to your point, because you're not as spoiler sensitive as I am.
No.
To your point, I didn't even know that the game was being spoiled for me. Now I can think back on it. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember reading comments that told me that this was going to happen. But I totally forgot because I didn't have any context. Right. And when it happened, I was blown away and totally shocked. And then I'm like, oh wait, but somebody mentioned that. I didn't freaking know what they were talking about though. So it was a surprise to me.
Yeah. So, where does one begin in terms of like writing a sequel?
Yeah.
And it was really interesting for me in researching this to learn how much about the game changed from like
quite
the beginning to the end, and even a lot right at the very end due to some world sort of events, disasters, terrorist attacks, and things like that happen in real life that were like not the same as what happens in the game, but at least there was adjacent elements that made it feel like, if we're releasing this 1 month after the 9/11 attacks, it might not be like in
sensitive,
the greatest taste to do that. And there was a big like panic that happened internally at Konami because of this.
This happened multiple times throughout development. Kojima has his fingers on the pulse of something deep.
Tends to be very aware, not just of pop culture, but of kind of world events, and tries to weave a lot of like real world issues into the games that he's making, the stories he's writing.
Well, another example is that he had certain elements that were then in the movie The Matrix that he had developed first, but the game hadn't come out yet. And so Matrix kind of used a lot of his ideas that he had already developed for that movie. And then he kind of had to rework a few things to make it not seem like they were kind of borrowing from that IP.
Right.
So there are a lot of ways in which a lot of his stuff is like kind of spot on. And I don't know. He's an interesting guy. He's very insightful, I think.
Yeah. So, original concept at a certain point, they were thinking about doing a scenario in the Middle East and Iraq.
Yeah.
They, due to real world events, again, it was kind of like maybe maybe we'll just stay away from that controversy.
And it was in 1998, and I mean I remember this stuff. I remember in 98 when all of a sudden America started dropping bombs on Baghdad, and it was like live footage of bombs hitting the city. And I remember thinking like, dude, what would that be like to like live in a city and have those things just like slowly descending on you like in real life, right? That was, what was I, 12 maybe, something like that. And apparently the producers of the game were like, hey, America might invade Iraq. Let's not do this. Let's not do this. And there's a lot of reasons why that's a smart thing to do. You don't want to go up against America's media machine when the propaganda arm is in full swing, trying to get the people supporting a war. It's like you don't want to be on the other side of that. Anyways.
Yeah, it could be.
It's a problem.
Especially if you're trying to sell a lot of games.
Yes.
So it shifted at another point to two possible scenarios they were kind of wanting to work on. One was this idea of sort of creating a game that was all in these really tight corridors on like a ship, like an aircraft carrier type of thing.
And the whole game was going to take place in one location.
Just in that one location. Was the idea, I mean, that's kind of what Metal Gear Solid was as well. It was all Shadow Moses.
Shadow Moses, that's right.
The facility, the base. But he had this other idea of like rather than like a ship that's moving, another location that's kind of out to sea, an oil rig.
Yeah, that's
essentially, right. or that type of structure, but it would all take place there.
But it was essentially in the same place. This was all both the ship and the oil rig are right near Manhattan.
Yeah,
basically right off the coast of New York.
Right. So when they found out, as they were sort of developing the ideas, that what became the tanker rather than the aircraft carrier was not going to be a long enough scenario to make a full game out of, they just went with both. There was just like, we'll have this be the first scenario, and then we'll switch to this one as the second scenario.
Yeah, they did, and Kojima almost felt like they were two separate games that were being merged together, and he had this idea to possibly just call the game Metal Gear Solid 3.
Yes,
just
that's true.
To confuse
that was
everybody.
So freaking weird. And that was in reference to the towers, right?
The three great towers of New York. Yeah, once again, man.
Once again, which like literally a month before the game releases is no longer the case. Just crazy what happened in the world during the development of this game that affected it.
And it's
in
all
so
stuff
many ways
that for us is formative years, like very indelible, like deep memories within, especially the culture, but just like for us, like these are some of the biggest memories that we have is of this stuff happening during the development of this game.
Yeah, for sure. It was, I mean, we've talked about this in the past. This is one of those hinge moments in history where like just everything changes after it.
Yeah.
This is definitely one of those times. Another thing I thought that was funny was that in Metal Gear Solid 1, this was the case too, but they used Lego.
Yeah, that's right.
To build the basically the levels.
Yeah, the whole rig, basically all the sections and all of the ports and all that.
So they went a little further with it in the first game. They actually like physically built like all the
storyboarding,
levels,
right?
Yeah, kind of feeling out like, okay, how do we want this design? This one they didn't go quite that far. They more or less just got like the general structure of each one, but they built it with Legos first, then they ended up going in and 3D modeling it. So
can you imagine, like, you're in this big studio, you got like how much, $20 million to make a game or whatever they had, and it's like, okay, I'm missing this piece. Does anyone have the curvy piece with the one on top and the two on bottom? Oh crap, we're gonna have to special order that piece. And if you remember building stuff with Legos, it's like you're always missing one piece. And can you imagine being part of this huge project and being like, crap, we're missing one piece. We're missing one piece. It's probably under somebody's desk. We gotta buy a whole new set now just for that one piece. Love it.
Now, this next note that I took, it really kind of boils down a little bit to what I was talking about at the beginning of like, I always have like conflicted feelings. I guess it's not like really conflicted on like the 1,000-foot view of my feelings on Metal Gear.
Okay.
Like, obviously I like these games.
Yeah.
But I have always felt conflicted about this particular disparate elements of it.
Okay.
Because it's crazy to what degree this dev team goes to be accurate and like realistic in one sense. So like, they
I know where you're going.
They go to New York as a team.
Yeah.
And they're taking photos of everything.
They had multiple trips.
Yeah. They go onto
these boats.
Tankers and boats, and they take photos of those corridors, and you can see almost one-to-one.
Yeah.
The design is like perfectly realistic.
Down to the lighting, like the types of lights that they used and the color. Yeah.
It's like crazy the level of attention to detail they're putting into getting this exactly right.
Yeah.
Not only that, but also in like the description of weapons and technology and how they work. And it's like, no, our actors need to be coached by an actual like military advisor who's going to be on set showing them, don't hold a gun like James Bond with the barrel pointing up like this.
No one does that.
No one does that. This is dangerous. You always have the gun pointed down when you're moving.
Finger off the trigger, pointed down.
Yeah, so they're like, it's so funny to watch Snake and Raiden and other characters in the story, even Otacon, explaining the weapons and like they're talking about the Russians and the weapons that they have.
And then depending on which group you're in, you're gonna have to switch your arms. Yeah.
And so like there's all this detail to being like very accurate in all of this.
Yeah.
and they just get really, really technical with it. All for a story in which you fight supernatural, like freaking, like just batshit crazy bosses. Like bosses that like control bees in Metal Gear Solid 3, or that are literal blood-sucking vampires that run on water, or that like sip on wine and ride rollerblades.
Rollerblades were big in the 90s. Hey, man. Rollerblades in the 90s were cool.
It's just like, what the fetch is going on? You're going to have that in the game, and yet you're going to get so like locked in.
Yeah.
And like very accurate and technical on the construction of your government conspiracies, and like describing the weapons and helicopters and airplanes and like all the technology. But nanomachines are magic. We can hand wave that away. We can have
the AI at the time was not
people's spirits living on through arms that are grafted on, like just crazy stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's totally congruent somehow with this other like really strong attempt to be grounded and realistic and gritty.
In some ways, you're just describing the ineffable magic of Metal Gear Solid.
I don't get it. How does this work?
I don't think anyone gets it. And once again, it's like, gosh, maybe that's the point. And maybe Kojima is just a smart person, and he knows something we don't, which is you can go really far in one direction, and as long as you're still grounded in this other place, people will still follow you. Yeah. And that's something I would never have gone as far as he has gone. Like never in a million years. Never. And he wanted to go a lot further. The dev team actually really constrained him a lot in what he was able to do. And sometimes he would put things to a vote, and people would like say like, we're not doing that, or oh, that sounds crazy. He actually tried to foster a really collaborative environment with his dev team. Often he would have them, well, actually, I think throughout the entire process, he gave them these journals that they were to write every day. They had to write one new idea that they had that could be implemented within the game. And like, I don't know that this went to every single person, but at the very least, a lot of people on the dev team had to write notes every single day.
Yes.
Whether you were an engineer, whether you were a programmer, whether you were rigging or modeling, whether you were working with the engine or story or any of that stuff, it didn't matter. You have to give him an idea that would help make the game better. And most of them were bad, right? Of course. But some of them actually did make it into the game. And Kojima really wanted, I think, at least in part because he wasn't expecting to continue directing these games after this one, he wanted to foster growth within his group and help these people feel like they're making a difference and not just following orders, right? So often the team that there's two sides of that. One side is, oh, isn't this great? The other side is, now even Kojima can't really do everything he wanted to do, all the crazy stuff. The dev team sometimes would veto his ideas and say, we don't like that. We don't think that's good. And of course, sometimes the producers and the people above him would veto some of his ideas as well.
Speaking about that though, I'm not the only one who is like surprised by / just like shocked at some of these ideas. Speaking of one of them that didn't make it into the game, there was going to be another member of Dead Cell.
Oh, the Chinaman. Yeah, that's
He was going to have a tattoo that when you go into water would come to life and like fight you.
And then if you get hurt underwater, then you bleed, and then he sends sharks
to attack you.
And apparently it was late in development when they axed that character.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh,
and they ended up giving some of his powers like running on water to Vamp instead and things like that. But anyway, I'm not the only one, obviously, who thinks it's crazy. This must be a joke. This can't be real.
Yeah.
The character designer felt the same way.
Yes, he did. At first he was like, "Are you being serious?"
He mentioned multiple times.
That's right.
I thought Kojima was joking.
I thought he was joking.
He kept saying it, so I was like, he must be serious. But like, this can't be real, right? Like you're just trying to yank my chain or whatever. Like that you don't actually want me to make a vampire, like a literal vampire, a character in this game, right? Like you're not
like in the same sentence. Like, wait, hold on, that's not realistic. Oh, by the way, how were you along on that vampire character? Like, is it coming along well? Like, bro, are you the same person that you were 2 minutes ago when you were just telling me that the guns weren't pointed in the right direction because no true military marksman would hold a gun in such a manner. Oh, but also that vampire is
yeah, exactly.
And there is something to that, especially with fantasy and sci-fi, where it's like some things just have to be grounded, and it's not like a rule as to what those things are. Nobody could probably tell you specifically, as long as this is grounded, everything else is fine. No, you kind of feel it as you go, but people intuitively know as they're reading your story, this is not. This is unhinged. That's literally what the word unhinged is. It isn't grounded. It's just the door is falling off. It's floating out into space. There is no hinge. There's nothing keeping it in place.
Yeah.
And Kojima discovered a magic that allowed him to go so far. And I'm surprised. I'm actually shocked at how far the people above him with the money, there was a lot of money for this game. This was a high budget game.
Yeah, it was.
How far they let him go into like crazy cuckoo world that even Hollywood doesn't do anything even remotely close to this.
And even Metal Gear Solid 1 had some of that, but this takes it to
way
a totally different level. It's like he was becoming more unhinged and was like more galvanized by the success to just like unleash his insanity.
Yeah. That's wild.
Now, I say all that in all due respect, and
absolutely.
I think he's a wonderful game designer,
and it's a great game.
His stuff, but this is crazy, and I just think it had to be at least mentioned that
absolutely
even members of his own team thought he was nuts. Now, speaking of characters, this is probably as good a time as any to talk about Raiden and some of the controversy around that.
I don't know because I was surprised to meet him in this game.
Okay, so that's I think that's worth talking about.
Okay.
Like,
and I don't know when we should talk about that.
We can put a spoiler tag on this if necessary. We'll have spoiler tags on this and make sure that, for those of you who don't know, that you won't have this element of it ruined. I had never played Metal Gear Solid 2. I had already played 3 before I played 1. But I knew that this was something people complained about in the game.
I believe I heard it, but forgot it because I didn't care because I hadn't played the game before until I played the game and was utterly shocked and bewildered as to the addition of Raiden.
You were not expecting to play as a different character.
I was not expecting it at all. And I wonder if we should even bring it up right now or treat it as it comes.
I'm super interested in how that's possible.
You and I can talk about this. I forgot because after a while, after the game was over, I was like, I do kind of remember people talking to me, and I remember his name. I remember his name being brought up a lot, but I thought he was just a character.
Because I've played Metal Gear. What's the one where you play as Raiden? He's the almost fully cyborg at that part. It's not. Is it Revengeance? I think it's Metal Gear Revengeance or something like that. Yeah, or Rising. It was originally called Revengeance. They ended up changing the name to Rising. So I've played that too before playing this. And so
I had not.
I'm fully aware of Raiden. I knew that Raiden was a controversial thing for this game. And I think that that's relevant to talk about in terms of the development history and stuff.
Okay.
So, and I think most people understand, which is why I'm super.
I didn't. I did it. Here's the thing. I don't know that I think you are incorrect in that assumption because I did an entire review with you of Metal Gear Solid 1, and I read the comments, and many people did bring it up. I remember reading the comments.
Yeah.
After the fact, I remember that, I guess I did read about this sometime. I was shocked at how long it went.
Yeah.
I was shocked that it was 80% of the entire game.
Yeah.
I was shocked at him, who he is, what he looks like, everything about him, and I was bewildered at the decision to have him be the main character of this game. And I, afterwards, and specifically after looking into it and the insight that we can kind of help people with, which is this game is all about passing
the torch,
so passing the memes on to the next younger generation of people who aren't as experienced. It's beautiful and really good and works. And I actually really liked him by the end of the game. I really liked Raiden. However, I did not know that he was coming. And I was under the impression, which is what most people were under when the game first came out, that I was going to be playing as Snake throughout this entire game. And if there was a Raiden, it would be brief. And we'd be back to Snake. And I think I'm correct in this because the initial trailer for Metal Gear Solid 2 only showed Raiden in one shot at the very end. Raiden did not feature much in the trailer for the game.
This wasn't just like we're only showing beginning of the game. This was a purposeful deception.
Exactly, which is why I wonder if we yeah. So spoiler tags should definitely
we'll have spoiler tags on this and make sure that, you know, for those of you who don't know, that you won't have this element of ruin. But I think it's very important to talk about for the development history, because they just straight up lied. They lied in more ways than one. Like, it's not just about we won't mention him. It's about we're going to edit the trailers that are showing later game events where you are playing as Raiden, and we're going to stick Snake in there instead.
Oh, I didn't know they went that far.
Yes. Oof. Yes. If you go back and watch,
that is upsetting.
Not only the first E3 trailer, but the one for the year after that. So you had E3 2000 where they unveiled the game.
Yeah.
Where they very purposefully only showed tanker stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's the Snake scenario.
Yeah, that was an early build.
But then in the trailer that followed the year after, they showed all kinds of big shell stuff where you're playing as Snake. And so, like, they didn't just, like, allow people to speculate or allow people to assume that you're going to be playing Snake and just not mention it. They specifically showed parts where Snake is not the character you're playing as. And showed you being Snake in those parts.
Okay.
So it's a purposeful deception. And I want to make that clear. Like, they did it on purpose.
Yes. There's a good line from the very beginning of that documentary that was released alongside the game, or what? It came a little bit after, maybe. I don't know when the documentary
I think it came out on the Substance release of Metal Gear Solid 2 as a bonus DVD thing.
So there's a line where I think it was the event or the scenario, or I think it was the event planner, I can't remember. One of the developers was just kind of walking us through that initial scene where you very first see Snake. He's walking down the bridge, right? Is it the Washington Bridge, something like that?
Yes.
And he's got a coat on, and he says, now you assume it's Snake because this is Metal Gear Solid. But as the camera gets closer, you kind of wonder, is that Snake? And then as he walks forward, he lights a cigarette, and then the developer's walking you through it going, okay, see, now we know it's Snake. But do we really know? He's still wearing that hood. Who is he? And then all of a sudden he pushes a cloaking button that makes him, this is the very first scene of the game, by the way.
Yeah.
It makes him invisible. And then it's like, oh, well, this can't be Snake. This must be somebody else. And we already dealt with, other people who look similar, maybe in previous games. And then he jumps off the bridge. And then, of course, then he says, okay. And then when you finally see him enter onto the ship, you realize, oh, it is Snake after all. And they did this intentionally. And he says specifically, he said to create confusion is what he said.
Yes.
So the purpose of this whole scene was to create confusion, dissonance within your mind about what was going on, that then kind of resolves at the end of the scene, and that in a satisfactory way, not a frustrating confusion, but just kind of a curious confusion, a puzzlement maybe, that then resolves in a satisfactory manner of, yes, this is Snake after all, right? Now, I'm going to extrapolate that developer's description of that scene to the entire game now and say, that is what Kojima wanted. And this person was probably instructed to do this. In fact, a lot of scene directors or event designers, what's the word for that? The event planners? Event planners. So the event planner was likely directed to do things like this, the event planners of the game, because the whole arc of this game, these scenes kind of mirror the whole game, that Kojima had this big arc that he wanted to explore of purposefully confusing the player, right? Until you get a good resolution kind of at the end. I feel like a lot of the scenes in this game kind of took that same arc and just put it into their little scene of like, okay, now we're going to confuse people this way. Now we're going to confuse people here. Now we're going to confuse people here. And gosh, most people can't get away with this in any type of art or movie or game or book. You can't just confuse and puzzle your participants, your readers, your players. You can't just confuse them for this long. Unless your name is Hideo Kojima, then you can do it. And he's got some magical touch, I guess.
Yeah.
But yes, the purpose was to create confusion, which means I'm more or less just agreeing with you that this was all done intentionally.
Yes.
And that is wild. That's just wild. It's wild. Does anyone else do this kind of stuff?
No. Well, I've actually had a couple thoughts on this. There's actually a lot of stuff I kind of wanted to touch on with this. And it's hard to know where to begin, but what I don't like the purposeful deception. in trailers. I think this is a bad practice, and I think it is the reason why there was a lot of backlash to this, and a lot of people were pretty pissed.
Okay.
Like, that's self-inflicted wounds. That's like your own fault. Now, I understand the reason behind it. I can see there not being a malicious intent there, right? I can see it being like, I just want people to be really surprised. I want people to like get to this and be like, oh, wow, this is not what I expected. And I guess he's assuming. At the same time, though, he did write some really interesting, or say some really interesting stuff in interviews where he's like, this is my Metal Gear and I can ruin it if I want to type of like sentiments, right?
That's so bad.
So he at least had some concern about that, but I don't think he wanted people to have a bad time or to be disappointed. I think he just wanted to legitimately surprise them and break, subvert their expectation with this.
Yeah.
Also, there's a couple of things that go into his reasoning behind the decision to make Raiden kind of the real main character of the story. He's not. Kojima still refers to Snake as the main character of this game. He's just not the POV character for the majority of it, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's
but there's two elements to this. One, there were some women on the team and others who he overheard saying like they didn't really relate to this older, gruff sort of like guy in his like 30s or however old he's supposed to be. They would have preferred a younger, more handsome, classical. I guess in Japan, I don't know if classically handsome is even a concept there.
Oh well, when we say classically handsome, it usually refers to Roman.
Yes,
yeah, for them, it's different.
Yeah. Yes, they're ideal for that.
Although the character does look pretty Western, so I don't know.
The point being that they went with the design for Raiden, which was, a lot of people call him effeminate. I'm not sure I would use that term.
And in the documentary, they just say intensely gorgeous. Or I can't remember what the wording was.
Yeah, he said something like
the most beautiful
exceptionally beautiful man or something like that. Yes.
Which,
I've never quite been on board with this idea that Raiden is an effeminate character. I don't think he is at all.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be.
But that's, the way people have sort of taken it.
Okay.
And that this came from some of the desires of female staff members and maybe thinking, okay, what does the audience really want? The other part of it, though, and I think this is the part that, for me, is why this works. He says here, in Metal Gear Solid 2, I wanted to give depth to the Snake character, which is very hard to do when the player is playing Snake himself. So I got the idea of distancing the player from Snake to provide a more objective view of him. Thanks to this, Snake gains in stature. When you play Raiden, who is only a beginner, and then you encounter Snake, he suddenly seems more impressive. So there's the other issue.
Yes, I agree with that, by the way.
Yeah, I do too. There's the other issue of we're going to have to tutorialize our new players to this. Yeah. And Snake is a very, very experienced character at this point who should not be told how to do basic things.
So this is the story. I see. This resolves a specific story issue within video games, especially sequels, which is your character already knows all this stuff. Why are people as you know, dialoguing like this experienced soldier?
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, I think the two parts of this that I really agree with and really like, and this is why I love this choice.
Oh, I
to
do
make
too.
Raiden the
dude.
POV
He does
character.
Freaking flips down the stairs.
He's freaking awesome.
He's dope. he's awesome.
I like Raiden as a character a lot. Maybe some of that is painted by the fact I didn't play this when it came out. I'd already played Metal Gear Solid 4. I'd already played Revengeance Rising, whatever it's called. So
well, do you know why I wasn't bothered by him? I didn't know I'd be playing as him the entire rest of the game. So I was like, oh, dope. For a short stint, I get to play as this younger dude who can flip downstairs. That's cool. I'm down. I didn't know. I really didn't know.
That was going to be the rest of the game.
Yeah, maybe I would have felt differently.
But I totally agree with this, though. One, Snake is an experienced character who's already gone through kind of an arc from MGS1. In order to sort of give more development or mystique to that character, in order to make him out to be the legend he is now, it makes a lot of sense for this character who is a new agent and doesn't have field experience, who knows the legends of Solid Snake, to be sort of looking at him through that viewpoint. I agree that that's a more interesting way to continue to build on the Snake character than to just play another, sort of like spy scenario as the same character again.
Yeah.
Particularly after what happened at the end of MGS1 and him sort of overcoming the biological sort of like dictates of his genes, and like the whole thing being about, are you what you're made to be on the genetic level, or can you aspire to more than that? Like, he sort of went through that. And you even see that in some symbolism in this game too. So it makes sense that character has achieved that and moved on. And if we're going to be bringing in new players, it makes sense to put them in the shoes of someone who's green and new, right?
It makes perfect sense. I don't think every game should do this, but I have another way to kind of bring this around to something we've talked a lot about. It almost sounds like Snake has gone through the Tarzan stages of the Animus up to, he's basically Hermes now. And Hermes' role is less to be the one who is in the thick of it all the time, and more to become maybe a patriarch is a decent word for it, a teacher, a grandfather figure, almost like a mentor kind of thing, where instead of you got the initial, I guess we should explain this a little bit, with the stages of the Animus, you have the initial stage 1, which is, I actually came up with a new way recently of kind of viewing this. You have the egocentric initial stage, which is very genetically pre-programmed, right? The I am extremely important, everyone look at me. And that is called the Tarzan stage. Basically, he goes through the egocentric self-driven motivations into the maybe more romantic or / like the inclusion of others, right? In saying at least one other person being like, oh, you're important too. Let's, work on this together. And then to the inclusion of even more people, which would naturally happen as you get married and then become a father. And now there's a lot of people involved, and you have to be it's less about you and it's now more about a lot of people. And then the final step back, which is the whole community or everybody, right? You are now a mentor figure for the next generation. It makes perfect sense story-wise for Snake to have gone from Metal Gear Solid 1 into this game as the mentor figure. It makes absolute perfect sense. I get why people were upset. I don't recommend most games do this, or a lot of games, I suppose, do this. But it makes perfect sense, and I don't fault them for it at all.
No,
I don't think that it's a downside to the game at all. And I actually totally agree with Kojima that in the end of this, you come away with a much deeper appreciation for the character of Snake.
Yes.
Now, I almost wonder in how he wrote a lot of this stuff. Obviously, it's not first person limited, right? It's third person semi-omniscient at least. And that means that he can say Snake is still the main character because the way that the story was technically written, but the way that we experience the story isn't really the way that he may have written it. The way we experience it is first person,
right?
Like, this is who we are. This is who we're playing the game as, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. There's a little bit of a disconnect there between what his written words may have said and the way that the players actually experience his work as it's given to them.
Another way to frame this, we talked about this a lot in our Journey episode when we talked about the game Journey. The hero's journey is basically exactly what that game was modeled on.
Yeah.
And when you complete a hero's journey, there's the return with the boon that the hero learns, the lesson, the change that they go through. They take that back to their home, and then they share that boon with others, right? So you could say that Snake is essentially gone through that same arc. He went through the events of Metal Gear Solid 1, now has the boon, the knowledge, the wisdom, and is now passing that on to the next generation. He is essentially the wizened mentor character of Raiden's hero's journey. So it's a cyclical thing. And so, then in turn, Raiden would go through his journey, come back, bring a boon to the next generation. This all plays into the whole meme concept that is at the center of what this game's all about. So all of that to say, This is a brilliant idea, and I love everything about it. I do not condone literally lying to your audience to keep it a secret, because there's no need to keep it a secret.
At what point is it just the unreliable narrator, though? At what point do you say that this artist is lying?
When you show literal footage that is not in the game that you're buying. That is deception.
So that's a consumer.
That's deception.
I see. That could actually be against the FCC.
And gave me an expectation that I would do that. And that was a lie that's not in the game.
Yeah, there's a legal and there's a line crossed there. I agree with that.
I think that's a huge mistake, because there is no reason to hide this. You can talk about in your interviews, we're working on this theme of memes and passing on to the next generation. And so we're going to have a new character that's also playable alongside Snake or something like that. Just don't mislead the audience. I don't understand. That's the thing, is I just don't understand the need to keep this secret.
Yeah.
Like, what does that being secret add to the real core fundamental message of the game? Nothing. I don't understand, like, what the purpose of hiding that from everyone was. And if you were just upfront about it, I think people would have way more easily accepted it.
Yeah,
maybe not everyone, because some people, they just like Snake and they want to play Snake and they don't care about this,
deeper
message of the game. But then it's not for them. You're not writing this as a story for a person who's not ready to receive that message. Now, I have also had temptations as a person who is writing a really, really giant fantasy story that's going to be in many parts, planned multiple sequels. I planned to hide a very specific plot twist through lying to the public. And I have now decided this is a horrible idea.
Okay.
A horrible idea, and you should never do it.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm glad that I found this out before I made the same mistake.
Wow.
So he has this quote in regards to Snake being the main character of the game, even though he's not the POV character. I really thought I would be able to tell a better story of Snake from a third-person view with this new character as our narrator for the majority of the game. Make no mistake about it, Solid Snake is still the main character in Metal Gear Solid 2, even though he is not the main narrator this time around. When Metal Gear first came out 14 years ago, Snake was a rookie. But Solid Snake truly became a hero after Metal Gear Solid, and he really doesn't need any more advice through the codec.
Love it.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Wow.
So anyway, that's Raiden, probably coming out of spoilers at this point now.
By the way, he is voiced by the same person who voices Axel in Kingdom Hearts.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Same voice actor.
Yep.
I did not realize
his name is Quentin Flynn.
Yeah.
I recognized his voice too.
So I think the next thing to talk about here is they were really going for a cinematic, Kojima's thing is to make like very, very cinematic games. He's sort of like, I would say he and Matsuno with something like Vagrant Story were the two creators really early on who were like, we're going to use our like filmmaking aspirations and our love of movies to influence how we make a video game, which is very different from how games were made at that time. They were not presented in this way for the most part. Now they are. Now it's kind of like the norm.
Oh, yes.
But like back then it was not.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to, now at this point, they're working on the PlayStation 2. They have a bigger budget. He wanted to get an actual Hollywood film composer.
Oh, yeah, that's
to do the music for Metal Gear Solid 2. Calling him a film buff is like a major understatement. The dude's obsessed.
Yeah.
Obsessed with Hollywood movies.
And this was also passed down from his father, right? His love of watching these movies. His dad would like rent movies and they'd chill and watch them like at least every week.
Yes. Yeah. And he grew up making movies, all through school and things like that.
Yeah.
So and that's why he so often will work with Hollywood people on his games. He's getting actors all the time.
Yeah, Guillermo del Toro and Mads Mikkelsen and
tons of Hollywood people. He loves working with them because he just loves Hollywood. He loves Hollywood movies. He loves action films. And so anyway, he wanted to get a Hollywood film composer to work on this. They wanted to get Hans Zimmer.
That's right.
And they realized very quickly they did not have the money to get Hans Zimmer. So they ended up going with somebody.
After Prince of Egypt, right? That was Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, I mean, he would have done The Lion King and a bunch of other things. At the time, he was coming into his own as like a premier Hollywood.
He was, but
film
I
composer.
tell you, man, Prince of Egypt, man,
it's really good.
That score is a wonderful. I think that's what really cemented him up there
for sure.
But the person they went with did worked Hans
at the
Zimmer.
Same studio, right? Where is my freaking note? Hold on, it's down here somewhere.
His name was
George.
I didn't write his name down.
George Gregson Williams, or Harry Gregson Williams.
That's it.
So they go to Harry Gregson Williams, who worked as in part of the same production studio, because they weren't going to get Hans Zimmer. But they also had watched a lot of movies that he had done film scores for and thought he was great.
He had actually done some pretty big movies.
Some big movies. The Rock.
The Rock. Yeah.
And so they liked his style, especially the way he used synth in certain.
Yeah.
They thought that was going to work really well with Metal
Late
Gear.
90s. That was big. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what they ended up doing was gathering a bunch of his music and burning it onto a CD
and sending it back to him, as if he doesn't have his own music, right?
Well, what's actually funny was he said in an interview, there was music on there that I know for a fact was never released on an official soundtrack.
Ooh.
And I have no idea how they got
So Kojima pulled strings.
he freaking like pirated music somehow and like burned it on a CD to send him to be like, I love your sound.
Well,
this is like all this great music you've made. They're just flattering him and being like, we would love for you to work on this. And he had never really considered doing games before.
Right.
And I think
games
Hans
weren't
Zimmer,
seen as
what they are
high
now.
art, yeah.
And anyway, so Hans Zimmer was even like, feel free to do it, but just remember, you're trying to like make a career here as a film composer.
Right. This
like,
might be a step down.
This was even then like still considered a lesser thing, or not even really art. I mean, this is the height of Roger Ebert and everything he had to say about video games, right? Yeah. So, I don't know if it was necessarily a risk. Maybe he had time in between stuff, but the soundtrack is really good.
Oh, it's good.
It's excellent.
Yeah.
And he's not the only composer on it. They still had the guy who did MGS1 do a bunch of tracks too. Most of the cutscenes and things of that nature were done by Gregson Williams, and some of the other stuff that's filled in was
he puts like a synth to some ambient, like a beat and a synth to like ambience that is really unique. It's really cool.
Yeah. So and then just the theme of Metal Gear Solid 2 itself, I think, is really good. I really, really like it. It's very heroic. It's very like classic Hollywood.
Yes. Yeah.
It just fits like perfectly. So I thought that was kind of a funny story, that how Replacement Killers, the Replacement Killers was the film that he had composed, that they specifically they saw that movie and they were like, I love the sound of that soundtrack. That's what we want from Metal Gear Solid 2. So anyway, they ended up landing him, but the process of writing music is not the same as for films. At least it wasn't at that time. He was not seeing the scenes.
No,
that's how you compose for movies.
Picture. They sent him a picture and then a little written summary.
Just a written summary, and a lot of times even just one word: sneaky, or action, or
dramatic,
heroic, or something like that. Just write something that feels like this. And he would just kind of try to write as best he could, but and that was a challenge for him, and he liked kind of doing this in reverse. You write the music first, they fit the music to the image, versus watching the pictures, writing to the pictures.
So that's good, because that puts the music as primary in a way, right?
Yeah.
That this is what we start with. We start with the music, and then we try to make everything fit. That actually puts him like on a higher level in terms of the art. He has more influence.
They are writing to him versus him writing to the director or the editor.
Cool. I see how that could be appealing, and because it's at first I'm like, he probably hated that, but now I'm thinking that was probably freeing, and fun for him.
Yeah. So
until all the revisions come in and change this, and it's like, can you give me something so I can look at, so I can know what I'm even doing? Like, no, you did it wrong.
So then we come up towards the reveal of the game. E3 2000. They were very, very concerned because this is really early on. I mean, like most other companies haven't revealed their next big thing, whether it's Resident Evil or Final Fantasy or they haven't revealed
and the PS2
Tomb Raider.
Has just has it
it's,
even launched yet, or had it technically not launched?
I think it was just about to, or had just launched.
Okay,
it was brand new hardware,
brand new,
and not a lot of knowledge about what your contemporaries are doing and how far they're going to be able to push the tech. And they had focused a little bit more on environments than on like high poly models, and they were worried about how it would be received, visually. But they put together this 9-minute long trailer, super long trailer.
That's really long.
That had like a ton of footage of the first scenario in the tanker. And it was met with a standing ovation, and people were just freaking stoked. It was possibly the most anticipated game, like once it was unveiled, that there was.
So they succeeded. They drew the hype.
Oh yeah. People were absolutely freaking losing their minds excited for Metal Gear Solid 2.
Apparently, they were able to sell that trailer on a DVD at like video rental stores. You could go and rent a DVD. This is in the days before you could really like stream a trailer. You had to either spend forever downloading it overnight, or in Japan, you were able to rent a DVD that just had this trailer on it.
Yeah.
And people did. And they actually made money doing that, which is like crazy to think about now. Like you go to a rental store just to get a trailer for a game. Like what in the world?
Yeah.
That's just not the world we live in anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Man, it's so weird to think how long ago this was and how times have changed. But no, they killed themselves getting this freaking trailer ready. They thought they weren't going to be able to get it done. They had to reprogram a lot of their AI, like the enemy AI, to get them to behave in the ways that they wanted to get the shot they wanted. So he has like this very specific shot he wants to do, but the enemies
won't do it.
are programmed to like walk on certain patterns, and they're just not reacting the way he wants. So they actually went in just for the trailer to like reprogram the AI so that it would behave in the way they wanted it to for the shot they were trying to get in the trailer.
Oh my gosh. There's a lot of writing on that trailer.
But yeah, it worked. It just skyrocketed, hype through the roof. People were super stoked. And it was the most successful Metal Gear Solid game sales-wise.
Oh,
Metal
really?
Gear Solid 2.
Oh, 2 was. Wow.
I think it surpassed 7 million units or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Like definitely its the most successful game sales-wise in the franchise. But it almost didn't launch when it was supposed to. So they were really shooting. This is another weird thing. There's so many things about Kojima where it's like, the dude is obviously really smart and a really good designer and very creative and all these things. But they were like super, super, super locked into this idea of releasing the game in 2001, which is the year of the snake. It was like really important to them that it
love Japan, dude. Isn't Japan so
in
cool?
the year of the snake.
Oh, man.
No matter what, like at all costs. Compromise, whatever. We got to get it out of the year of the snake. I don't understand that mentality personally.
It's Japan. I love it. It's so cool. It's so cool. They have a very, very deep culture. Well, once again, if you're talking about the memes, man, like there's deep relevance to that.
So they're trying to get it out. It's going to be like Q4, end of the year 2001. They do end up finishing the game.
Yeah, November I think is when it launches.
They run into some problems because there's some scenario at the very end, which I won't detail now, but the story happens in New York City.
Yes.
And there's some destruction that was planned in New York City.
Yes.
And literally the month before release, maybe even less than a month.
Less than a month, because it was the final ROM was exported on September 28th.
Yeah. And they
2-3 weeks.
A lot of the higher ups at Konami call him in and they're like, I don't think we can release the game. You got to really explain to me like what exactly goes on here in terms of this destruction in New York.
Well, I think at this point, Kojima loses creative control. Is my personal opinion.
Yes.
After playing the game. I think the higher ups are calling the shots now. And the game's done. Like the game is almost done. Yeah. There are a few things they had to do. They've removed a lot of references to things and American flags and things like that. They were able to take them out of the game.
They were trying to be very sensitive to this, world-shattering terrorist attack that had happened.
And the people who have a lot of risk involved in this, i.e. the investors and the stakeholders, they were very uneasy at this point. And when they're uneasy, you lose creative control.
Yes.
And luckily this was at the end. They weren't able to change much about the game itself, right? The story, right? That was all set. That was done. You can't change it now. But there's some stuff we'll talk about at the end, probably of the whole series, that I feel like was very deliberately inserted into that game. And the way that it was inserted, being very intentional because of 9/11.
Yeah. I just wanted to say really quickly that I empathize so much with just how devastating that must have been at the very end of the development of this game that you've poured your heart and soul into for years, that you've overcome hurdle after hurdle and problem after problem, and just the stress that goes into such a big, massive project and managing so many people and just like being at the head of that and having to like keep everybody going. Like that is an incredibly stressful thing.
It is.
You see a lot of times a developer of a AAA game or a director, like an upcoming director who works on a big movie and then's like, I'm never doing that again.
I've seen it happen many times.
Gareth Edwards is one.
By the way, he put out a new movie recently that is apparently really legit.
Oh, I got to check it out.
Yeah. He still does stuff. He's just small scale now. You know, he doesn't want the big.
You get this really, really great up and coming, super talented director who goes and works on Star Wars.
Edwards
and says,
is so good, by the way.
Never again.
Never.
And there's a reason for that. There's a real reason for that. It is not easy, and it'll take years off your life.
Oh, yeah,
you see, like Peter Jackson,
he didn't want to do The Hobbit.
He didn't want to do that, and then he ended up doing it, and it was like way more stressful than it should have been for all of these reasons we won't get into. Point is, I am currently working on a project that is infinitesimally smaller than this, and there was a deadline that I made sure that we hit. And we were on board and it was like, okay, we're going to move forward. And then the entire thing got pulled and like, as devastated emotionally and as just as stressed out as I am about this TV spot I'm working on right now, like a little 30-minute TV special.
Yeah.
And how much crunch is going into that right now. I've been working like 12-hour days for the last several days. I'm gonna be working this weekend and all through the week of Christmas. And like I am falling apart almost at the seams. And this is essentially one-man editing job. We had a couple of others on the crew who did some of the interviews and filming, and you know, there's some people above me, obviously, who are doing like approvals and things like that. But just in comparison, this is like nothing, like literally a speck of dust.
Kojima would love to be in your shoes.
And I am like losing my mind with stress over this thing. I can't even imagine after going through years of development on this game.
For one thing,
And then for that to happen. And then your bosses are like threatening to pull the plug on the whole thing.
Right.
So, you know, you get a little bit in your feelings when this happens.
It would suck. However, what if the game was released in August?
The following
what
year?
If he didn't?
Oh, before that.
What if he didn't have time to really quick fix it and add some stuff?
Would have been crazy.
It might have been worse.
So he essentially goes to resign.
Oh,
and is like, I like in shame, like commit career like seppuku.
Oh, jeez.
I'm so sorry that I've done this shameful thing, right? A little bit hyperbolic, but like I can see where it's coming from.
Sure.
And it was Ken Kutaragi who basically reached out to him and was like,
he was the head of Sony.
You have nothing.
PlayStation.
Essentially the head of PlayStation. You have nothing to be ashamed of here. Release the game.
It's in your fault, bro.
Like, get it out there. It's fine. You have nothing to be ashamed of. They made a few tweaks to the ending just to like make sure they're being a little more sensitive, got the game out, and it wasn't a problem, and it ended up being a smashing success.
Yeah.
But that part of the story
that's crazy.
Is crazy.
That is wild.
And it's I don't want to call it a cautionary tale necessarily, because I think people should do this, but when you fly a little close to the sun in a certain sense of like
Icarus,
what's really happening out there in the world, and I'm going to like include this into this my story. What you're playing with a little bit of danger potentially.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying it was almost a disaster in this case.
Well, risks are often no risk, no reward, right? Like
exactly.
But high risk, high probability of this kind of stuff happening.
Yeah, right. Here's a good quote about the themes and their depiction in the game and the similarities with real world events and things like that. So, the depiction of the game's themes and its numerous similarities with the real world events on 9/11 rendered it unfit for release at the time.
Right.
After consulting with lawyers, the end result was that the game required revisions in 300 spots. It goes without saying that we were in crisis mode and it was threatening the release and sale of the game.
And guaranteed Kojima did not have any say. All 300 of them.
No.
Like, it's like, do them all.
You have to do this because these are lawyers telling you. This is your the department coming at you. The game shouldn't be released at this period of time. I have no other choice but to take responsibility and resign from the company.
It's a very Japanese thing to do.
Exactly. It's like it's very symbolic of seppuku almost. Yeah. So then you got Ken Kutaragi saying, "This is not a matter you should be ashamed of. You should go ahead and release the game." Another guy who reached out to him was Kagemasa Kozuki, the founder of Konami, through email. And he said, "I have made up my mind. The game should be released. What are your thoughts?" I was so moved by the words, I too made up my mind. So, in the end, they got it out. Happy ending. But it was really, really, really scary and rough there for a minute for me.
That's wild, man. Those must have been those 2-3 weeks must have been the most stressful of
his life.
Possibly of his life. Yeah, at least of his adult life.
Yeah.
His career.
Yeah. So you had one more note.
I did. There's a few things. There's a few things that converged at this exact moment in time. Of course, there's the issues with Iraq and the likelihood that America was going to be getting involved in the Middle East again, right? There were the issues with, there's issues with artificial intelligence.
Oh, sure.
There was, what was it? They're like IBM made that computer that beat the first human at chess.
Yes.
AI was becoming, starting to like be a possibility on the horizon. Of course, it took decades longer than they thought it would. There were a ton of hurdles that they didn't quite understand back in the 90s when they thought they would be able to just process information. And then we have AI, right? It's like, no, it was like way harder than that. But that was a thing that people thought was oncoming on the horizon, as well as the sequencing of the human genome. We already talked about that in Metal Gear Solid 1, so I won't go into depth much, but the full sequencing of all of the DNA of the human genome and what that implied, what people thought they would be able to do with that versus now the reality of like, well, where's all the other stuff, right? We sequence the whole thing, and there's stuff going on with humans that is not here. Where is it, right? Okay, well, the memes, right? Now that's where this ethereal, this other realm kind of comes into play, right? Which of course influences the direction of this game. And then Y2K. Now, I don't know if you're our age, you know Y2K,
what
right?
Y2K was.
I don't know how much younger though, so the people need to be to the point where they have no memory of this. This was a real thing. The first memory I have of my heart skipping a beat was when that ball dropped for the 2000. New
Year's Eve,
I watched it. Now this is funny because I probably watched a delayed recording, or like I don't know if it was legit midnight. I probably watched it. No, yeah. So Mountain Time, I would have watched it at 10 p.m. But in New York, it was midnight, right? So okay, so I was probably allowed to stay up until 10 p.m. back then. But my heart like stopped briefly when that thing hit zero because like you guys don't understand what it was like in 1999. Y2K was going to end the world. Nobody understands this because after it didn't happen, everyone pretended that, well, I always knew. Everyone just forgot that this maybe wasn't that big a deal to begin with.
Yeah.
This kind of reminds me of, remember when Gangnam Style, back like 10 years ago, Gangnam Style hit a number that YouTube was unprepared for. They had to update their system to a different scale. so that they could actually count the number of views. And they were like, his video like broke our system. We thought we planned for the contingencies. Turns out we can't even count the number that he just reached in terms of views. Now it won't happen to like 1 trillion, but I don't know, it'll happen one day. But this is that kind of thing, which is to say it doesn't break everything. It just causes some problems for that one thing. And then you go in and fix it and everything's fine.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people understood this, but as we've mentioned in previous podcasts, the alarmists get the microphone, right?
Yes.
Because
yes.
What if they're right? Like how, I don't know, if the 1% chance, I don't know.
This has always been true. Right, this has always been true, as is evidenced by this.
For thousands of years. Yeah.
It's like been just exacerbated tremendously by
like recently
podcast microphones like us. This and the internet.
And the internet. The internet. Once again, another thing, another burgeoning, like as Kojima mentions, everything is digital data now. Like it used to be stone tablets, then written records. Now it's digital data, which is like, people talk about storing things on the cloud now. It's like, where even is that? It's just there right now. I know it's technically on a server somewhere, but it feels as though it's just kind of everywhere now. It's just like up in the cloud. It's just like,
it's
surrounding
moving
us.
Around. It's bouncing around
and
from
technically
place to place.
With Wi-Fi, it kind of feels like that.
Yeah.
So anyways, a lot of these things all burgeoning, all kind of like basically converging on the same point, right? And him like kind of taking all of these scary and world-changing ideas and making a story using like all of them, right? All of the ideas at the time, which some of them, 20 some years later, some of them seem a little bit silly, right? Mm-hmm. Like the Y2K.
Like Y2K.
Yeah. Or some of the stuff that even like Hal talks about, like P2P sharing. And I'm like, yeah, that was big back then. It's different now. It's different now. Like you can get stuff in different ways. But I just wanted to really bring up like what it was like to live during that time. Like around the year 2000, man, the future was just indeterminate. Like you don't know where these technologies are going to take us. I certainly couldn't have predicted that we'd be where we are now. But you could feel it. There was something in the air and it felt very real. And along with the hope for the future came the possibility of destruction, which is why my heart stopped when the thing fell. And I was like, did Tom Brokaw, he said it, he said the thing, is it going to happen? And this movie, this game kind of takes those feelings, those emotions that we had and kind of like points it in a direction that I think is really important. We're going to talk late game themes, later on. But he deals with all of this stuff because it all converges on like, it's all the same thing, right? Like the AI, it's different ways of technology or of humans, the way that we interact with each other. But it all kind of, there's like this one governing like rule that's at the center of all of it. And Kojima is like, I'm going to tackle that part right there. Because the reason we even want these technologies to do what they're doing, the reason we're even afraid of all of the horrors or excesses or potential ways that things can go wrong, is it all kind of converges on the same point. And he takes that point and deals with it in a absolutely brilliant manner. But we're going to talk more about that at the very end of the game. But I was highly satisfied after finishing this game. But it gave me such a nostalgic feel for that 2001, 2002 world, right? Like I still am feeling it now. Like, oh man, that's so much fun. I haven't like immersed myself in that type of situation, in that type of media for a while. Like Lord of the Rings was in that time period, but it wasn't dealing with these issues. This game is just like pure 2001 and it's nostalgic. It's a wonderful experience.
Speaking of nostalgia, we're about to record another episode all about nostalgia,
and
but
it'll probably go up before
this one. So you would have watched that on Monday. If you haven't, go check it out. It's out as we speak. But that's where we're going to stop for today. Next time, if you guys want to play along with us for the book club sort of format we do on this, we're basically going to play the entire tanker sequence all the way up through the boss fight with Fat Man. So right after that boss fight is where we're going to stop. So we're going to play up through that point, discuss that up to that point next episode, and then we'll continue on from there after that. So play up to then, come back ready to discuss, and we'll see you next week. Peace out.